Nleko. She is a psychology major from Houston, Texas. After graduation, she plans to pursue a master's degree to become a clinical social worker and marriage and family therapist. Her presentation is entitled, "The Effect of Father Absence on Heterosexual Women's Mate Selection." Please give your attention to Gift.
Hi, my name is Gift, and I'll be presenting my research project on the effect of father absence on adult women's heterosexual mate selection. Let's start with the definition of father absence. So Cron defines father absence as those who do not interact with their children on a regular basis and who do not play a significant role in their development. So why is father absence a problem? Well, a survey conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau says that 24.7 million children are affected by father absence every year. That's an estimated 33% of the U.S. child population. The research shows that there are a lot of studies that have been conducted on father absence, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about a few of those studies. So the first one was by Draper and Harpending. They proposed the father absence theory. And they said that the father's relationship with the daughter affects how she goes about developing her own relationships and also how she relates with her children. Mackey and Emerman proposed that the father's relationship with the daughter affects her psychosexual development, and it also affects how she's able to have successful relationships in adulthood. In 2007, Meeker said that the father's role was one of the most important ones and also affects the quality of her adult relationships. Okay, so the research shows that there are a lot of negative effects of father absence, and I kind of want to talk about that. First, I'm going to talk about the impact on childhood development. Okay, so father absence affects the social and emotional development of the daughter, and it can lead to things like antisocial behavior and also having low self-esteem. Other effects in childhood can also affect academic achievement, so possibly the child not doing well in school. It can also lead to harmful behaviors like becoming pregnant at an early age or using drugs earlier on in life. Okay. Also, a study by Ellis et al. Showed that ages 5 or younger were more likely to become pregnant by age 16 compared to those who were 5 and older who were affected by father absence. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the effects in adulthood. So father absence can cause the daughter to have difficulty developing relationships in adulthood. It can also affect her ability to be independent and how she interacts with men or others. It can have varying effects like making her more attention-seeking or behaviors like being aggressive, physically hostile to her peers. It can also have the opposite effect, such as making her more withdrawn. So the effects vary, basically. Okay, I kind of want to talk a little bit about how race and family structure affects father absence. So McAdoo compared Caucasian and African American family structures and found that Caucasian families tend to have more patriarchal family structures. Basically, the father is the sole provider in the family, versus Caucasian families tend to have more, African American families tend to have more matriarchal family structures where the mother is the sole provider. And Johnson conducted a study showing that when looking at intact families, and I'm defining intact families as households where 2 biological parents are present. So intact families, Asians were most likely to have households with 2 biological parents present, and African Americans were the least likely to have 2 biological parents present in the household. Okay, so the research shows that theory supports how father absence has affected women, but it also, a lot of studies have not looked at how mate selection happens. So they talked about how a daughter might go about developing relationships, but not so much mate selection. Also, a lot of studies have looked at haven't really compared how father absence affects differ by race, and that's what I want to focus on. Another thing is I want to contribute to the body of literature because a lot of previous studies have focused on mother-daughter relationships and not so much the father's relationship with the daughter. Okay, why should you care about this study? Because I'm sure all of you here either know a woman, whether it's your mother, your sister, your grandmother, or your girlfriend or your wife, and they have likely been impacted by father absence in some form. So we need to figure out how to mitigate the effects of father absence. Okay, so I predicted 3 things based on this. The first was that father absence would affect women's mate preference. The second was that father absent women would tend to prefer more prestige characteristics and a lower preference for personality characteristics. So I'm basically defining prestige characteristics as status components or things that are external that a person would focus on. And I predict they would have a higher preference for prestige. Also, I also predicted that father absence, the effects of it would differ among race. So my participants were single heterosexual women over the age of 18. And the materials that I used were composed of an informed consent form. I also used a demographic form which assessed background variables relating to mate selection, racial variables, as well as father presence or absence. The father presence questionnaire was looking at how strong or the quality of the relationship with the father. The dating rating checklist I revised to look at personality or prestige variables. And an example of personality variables would be, is this person considerate? Are they dependable? Prestige characteristics would be, do they own a lot of clothes? Are they popular with the opposite sex? So that's kind of the difference. My procedure, I recruited people through online survey SONA system, and I also used posters. So the posters linked them to SurveyMonkey, and when they were on SurveyMonkey, they read the instruction for the survey and completed the 3-part questionnaire. Okay, so to analyze my data, I chose to use a 2x2 factorial analysis because I had 2 independent variables and 2 dependent variables. So my independent variables were father absence and race, and my dependent variables were personality and prestige. I also completed 2 Pearson correlations, and this was basically testing the relationship between father presence and the father presence questionnaire and mate preference variables. Okay, so the results of my study showed that out of 133 participants, most of them were freshmen. A lot of them were an average of 20, and also only 127 were single. Only 118 were single, and 127 were heterosexual. So those who did not fit the criteria for the study were not included in the analysis. And this graph is showing out of a total of 133 people, only 63 were remaining for the study. Okay, other results I found. So the father presence group was the largest, and you can see the top green, that's the father presence group. And I had 3 father absence groups. That was the bottom 3. Okay, the father absence groups were divided into off and on in the household during adolescent years, absent starting at a specific age, or never present in the household. And I also found that 55% had other father figures besides their biological father. Okay, so the results of my study. The 2-way factorial ANOVA did not find any significant results on any measure. But interestingly, the Pearson correlations found that for the personality measure, there was a significant correlation with father presence. On the other hand, the prestige variable did not find any significant correlation with father presence. So this means that those who had a stronger relationship with their father tended to prefer more personality or internal characteristics as being important in a mate. My hypothesis, the first one, which stated that father absence would affect mate preference, was supported. Hypothesis 2 was partly supported, and this said that father absent women would have a higher preference for prestige characteristics and a lower preference for personality variables. That was partly supported. Hypothesis 3, which stated that there would be a difference among racial variables, was not supported. So like I said, a stronger relationship with the father was a higher preference for personality, and there was no effect on the prestige characteristics. So this implies that it's not necessarily father presence or absence that is really important. It's more of the nature of the relationship. So how strong is the relationship? That's what really matters. There were a few limitations of the study. For one, the sample size and the population that I used, because I tested people in a university setting, it didn't really account for older, uneducated populations. So that was one limitation. Also, I had unequal groups, so if you remember from the graph, the bar I was showing you earlier, the top bar was the largest, and that was the father presence group. That was not really, it wasn't an equal comparison between all the groups, so that was another limitation. Restriction of range is basically saying there was not a lot of variability, and artificial dichotomous is saying there are a lot of forms of father absence, but I had to limit it to 3, so that is a limitation in itself. And I think the study doesn't also explain why father absence causes behavioral problems. Okay, so for future studies, I would suggest that possibly looking at women who are not in non-heterosexual relationships, lesbian or homosexual relationships, also considering how alternate father figures such as uncles, grandparents, or other male figures, how that would come into play and how the effects of that would vary. I believe that assessing women in relationships, like looking at women who are currently in relationships and then seeing who they actually partner with, that would be an interesting study. Possibly looking at how father absence would differ if a daughter was in a marriage. I think that would also make for an interesting study, and I think we need to explore ways to minimize the effects of father absence. These were my references, and I would like to thank Daniela Medley and the McNair Scholars Program for this opportunity. I would like to thank my faculty mentor, Dr. Aronson, for working with me this semester, and I would like to thank Dr. Kirk in the psychology department, Dr. Kirk, for helping me with analyzing the data. So, and I'm ready for questions. Yes.
I would like to ask you in the father absence definition, do you have divorced families?
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, say that.
Yes, maybe in a broader sense, can you define me what father absence means, divorce, or simply a person that who travels a lot? How big the absence is to be a father absent? I'm
Okay.
wondering for myself. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, so to answer your question, the broad definition that I had for father absence earlier was basically, Cron was defining father absence as those who do not interact with their children on a regular basis, or those who don't play a significant role in their development. And that was the definition. But also, while looking through the literature, I found that there are different types of father absence. So you mentioned divorce, that would be one of the forms of father absence. Other ones are abandonment or death. Can also cause father absence. And actually divorce was the one that had the most impact.
I expect it's more traumatic. That's right. All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay. Do you think then the death of the father, would that cause like more psychological, would the psychology be a little bit different than the actual definition, where essentially you just have someone who's abandoned?
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, one of the studies I looked at showed that there was a difference between death and divorce. So from that study, the father absence by death actually had a more negative impact. So, I'm sorry.
Less bad, right?
Yes, so father absence by divorce had a more negative impact, and father absence by death actually caused, like, the daughter viewed the absence more negatively. Yeah, so that was an interesting finding.
Can I complement the question? Is it about natural father?
A
or
biological
in
father?
the household? Sorry?
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah, biological father.
Biological.
Yes, yes. Any other questions? All right, thank you.